Guided inquiry number 1. Good morning. I want to do a guided meditation, a guided inquiry. We'll call them guided inquiries sometimes. Inquiry being looking into our direct experience as it happens and seeing it without trying to understand it at the level of mind. Right? We're inquiring into our experiences without looking for an answer that comes in the form of thought, in the form of a concept or an idea. Self-inquiry is looking into ourselves without looking for the answers that we're used to. We're not looking for something to explain who we are. And that's all that language can do, right? I mean, language can only kind of give us a very thin framework of what anything is, certainly who we are. They're just descriptions and identities and beliefs and thoughts. And they're helpful. They're helpful for communication, particularly, of course. We have to have concepts, but we then mistake them for who we are. And we may mistake them for who other people are and what other things are and what things mean. And we start believing our ideas and our thoughts about the world instead of really seeing and feeling the world, which is a byproduct of how deeply we know ourselves. And the quieter we are inside, which then allows for more sensitivity to the display of the world, right? To all the things of the world. The quieter we are, the more we can see, hear, feel, touch, love. When we're not believing our stories about the world, which always cause some kind of prejudice, right? Prejudice in the sense that if you believe one thing, it cuts out all the others. And not that the others are more right or that they're even in addition to. It cuts out the possibility that we don't know. It cuts out the possibility of something being everything. It doesn't allow us to recognize that everything is made of now. All of a sudden, we think we know something because we know its name. And it makes the experience of it, and it makes our own experience so small compared to how big it is, or how vast it is. Right? We're just running around with belief after belief, telling us a story about our lives and who we are and who everyone else is and what it means. So self-inquiry is a kind of inquiry, while at the same time not looking for an answer. It's inquiring in an open-ended way. And it's so counterintuitive, right? When we ask a question, when we inquire in our lives, we're inquiring so we can get an answer, right? If you want directions and you ask someone, you don't want them to be silent. That doesn't help much. So in life, our inquiries or so we can hopefully get an answer, a tangible answer that we can then use somehow. So when we inquire into the self, we can think of it that way. Self-inquiry is inquiring into the self, into ourselves, and also into the nature of self. We're not inquiring into our stories. We're not inquiring for more information about our lives or clearer information, or we're not looking for information about our particular lives. Right? That's beautiful too. And there's a place for everything. But this particular inquiry is into the nature of our being, the nature of presence. And again, those are just words. We can't expect to find an answer about who we are in words, even though it's tempting and the mind will do it. So self-inquiry is a questioning of ourselves without looking for an answer, without looking for a tangible answer, without looking for an answer in ideas and words and concepts and beliefs. The most common question is, who am I? Who am I? Am I really these stories about myself? Am I really a this and a this and a this and a this? And then all that adds up to me? Is that who I am? I mean, we see people experiencing this, and I've experienced a couple profound ones in my life where I had an identity crisis, particularly when I was a young man and I was very active athletically and loved it. It was so much of who I was the sports that I played and the athleticism that I had. And I injured my back when I was young, in my early 20s, and it was sort of taken away from me overnight, in a sense. And I remember after that going through I didn't know it at the time, I didn't recognize it at the time, but I went through a long period, maybe half a year or a year of sort of an identity crisis. It might have gone on longer than that, actually. Felt very insecure. I just didn't know who I was anymore. I had based my sense of self on, not entirely, but a large part of my identity was the athlete that I was. And so when that fell away very quickly, and that happens to people all the time, right, with tragedies generally, where all of a sudden something in their life shifts entirely. Maybe someone dies, or we have a terrible injury, or, I mean, I could go on and on, but I mean, I think we could usually say that tragedy is what causes these great rifts in our lives that happen quickly and deeply. And those always have the possibility of creating an identity crisis in us, where we no longer know who we are. The story about ourselves at some level has collapsed in an instant. And that can be extremely terrifying. It brings on a very profound sense of insecurity. And it's a very powerful experience. The first time it happened to me, I was in my early 20s, and I didn't know really how to dance with it at all. It was really scary. I just didn't know what was happening. I think it's always very disconcerting, right? If it's a true identity crisis, well, it's called a crisis, right? I mean, that's true with all of these very potentially transformative experiences, because they're so powerful. And by powerful, in some ways, I mean immersive. We don't have much separation from it at all. We feel completely engulfed by it. It has a certain power that is terrifying, right? It's a kind of taking our lives apart in a sense that, and the amount of energy in that and terror in that is profound. I think for transformative experiences to occur, they have to have a lot of power. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I don't know if that's true, but there seems to be some interesting thesis in there, and maybe it's really obvious. Maybe that's a really obvious thing to say, but the more powerful an experience is, and when it comes to suffering, it sort of means the most terrifying experiences we go through have the most power to transform us. And maybe they always do. Maybe people are transformed every time by them. Maybe they're transformed in ways that would not be considered positive. Though these experiences have the potential to crush us. And in that case, it helps for me to realize that I don't understand why anything happens. I don't know why some people tend to move in a healthy direction and why others tend to move in an unhealthy direction according to our norms after a crisis like that. That's where I have to understand that I don't, of course, and this is almost a very obvious thing to say, I don't know what any scheme is. I don't know what the bigger scheme is. I don't know if there is a bigger scheme. I don't know what the bigger workings of life are. So these are just my observations, right? And they don't hold much weight when we really think about it. That some people, get better after these crises and some get worse. But the power, right? Just back to the power. Because they're so terrifying, they have such power to transform us. So if we identify with some story about ourselves, any story, but the ones that are the deepest, we have those deepest identities. I'm a lawyer, I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a nice guy, I'm an awful guy. It's obviously more common for the positive stories to fall away than the negative ones, but it can happen either way. And when one of those gets disrupted, it just causes havoc in us. Who am I? Who am I? And you can see this very easily if you sort of just play with it a little bit and don't take it too seriously for a moment. Bring up some identity you have about yourself just in the form of a single thought. It can be, I'm a good tennis player. Let's say that's your thought about yourself. That's part of your identity. You play lots of tennis and you think of yourself as a good tennis player and you take pride in it and you have a lot of energy in it. You put a lot of attention to it. It's a big part of your life. You have a lot of friends that play. You play in college, maybe whatever. Right? It's a big part of your life. So one of your core identities is I'm a good tennis player. Now we can go about this two ways, but let's go about it first in this way. Imagine right now, if you weren't able to have that thought. Let's say right now you weren't able to have any thoughts about the fact that you played tennis at all. So you're sitting there and you know everything else about your life, but you don't know anything about your tennis life. Are you still here? What if it wasn't possible to remember that you played tennis? What if never again you remembered ever that you played tennis and no one reminded you? It's a very interesting version of self-inquiry, right? I mean, I love playing with new versions of these very old and powerful questions like, who am I? What am I? Coming up with versions that work for ourselves based on how we're playing with these concepts and seeing through them and working with them in our own lives and our own practices, to start to make it your own as often as you can, which gives it a certain delight. It becomes your own thing. It feels fresh, feels original, has power. And because it's fresh, it has an originality to it, meaning like we're really interested in it. We're able to gaze into ourselves in ways that maybe we can't always if we just do the same practices over and over again. So it's like that creative function that arises in us, appears within us. And it can take some of these old ways and make them our own, make them powerful for ourselves while keeping the original intent. We have to really understand these concepts, and they're all just concepts in the end, of course. We have to understand these concepts as deeply as we can. And when we really grok them, when we really understand them deeply, embody them, we can then start to play with them, make them our own and give them a freshness that can snap us awake. We may fall asleep again, but they have the power to snap us awake. And maybe we stay awake for good. There's always a why not, right? Why not? Why not? It has happened, apparently. So why not? So we use self-inquiry to ask these questions. If I could never have a thought again about being a good tennis player, I'm still here. It doesn't mean that identity wasn't precious and have lots of energy and whatever. It's a world, right? That identity is a world of things, people and emotions and relationships and energies, right? It's a vast world, those serious identities. But if it's gone, somehow miraculously gone in an instant, I'm still here. So I'm more primary than that identity. If I'm still here when the identity is gone, then first of all, I'm more primary, but also that identity wasn't me. It's gone and I'm still here. And we can take every identity, we can just go through them one by one. And I'm not saying they're going to go away instantly, and many of us don't want them to go away. But if you're interested in the quest for the self, it's never going to be an identity. It's never going to be some story about ourselves. It's what we find after we drop all the stories, all the identities. And we don't even find it. It's just what we are, right? It's presence. It's the one thing we've always known. It's the one thing that's always been the same. It's the one thing that's been the backdrop of every experience we've ever had. And we use self-inquiry to help us see that over and over again. Ramana talks about self-awareness, but he means it like being aware of the self until it becomes a permanent awareness. So we can still know our true natures and not be permanently abiding as that yet. So the idea is to see it as often as we can, right? To touch it as often as we can and to stay in it as long as we can each time. Just hoping someday there's a permanent shift into permanent awareness of the self, which I would equate with presence and now, Buddha nature. I mean, whatever word, but don't get don't get hung up on the words. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. When my mind is quiet, and that's another way we can check, identities can only exist as thought. And that doesn't mean they don't have, like I said, these incredibly complex, energetic aspects to them, or not even aspects. That's the whole thing. That's part of it. It's a whole thing, these identities. But they can't exist without the support of thought. I can't have an identity as a good tennis player unless I can think that I'm a good tennis player. There is no identity without the story. There may be energetics to that identity that exist or take however long they do to play out. But without the story, they're not even connected to it. They're just their own thing. So it takes thought to support an identity, which is a belief, essentially. And beliefs are powerful. Identities are powerful because they take up so much of our attention, right? We give those stories about ourselves. We give those identities power and energy with our attention. And in this case, we could equate attention with belief. And we pour a vast amount of energy into these things in ways we can't even believe, with how much we think about it and, how much we think about it, how much attention we give to it. But when all the stories fall away, when all the identities fall away, I'm still here. And we can only know that now, right? When the mind is quiet at any moment, the identities don't exist. You can be free of all identity right now. Anytime the mind is silent, for however long, we're free. We're free of identity. How would identity appear without thought? Think about that. How would an identity you have, any of them, we could get down to a very base one, like I'm a man. Is that true? Other than just being a concept. And if I asked you the question, how do you know you're a man? And you might say, I just know it. Which seems like a reasonable answer, right? I just know it. Like it's so part and parcel of me. I just know that I'm a man. So then we have to look, how do we know it? How do we know something in this context? How do I know that I'm a man? How would I know that? And even if you said, well, it's before thought, right? It's pre-thought. I just know it. There's just a sense of it. And then, we look deeper. I might ask you, well, what do you mean by a sense of it? Is it a feeling, a sense? You might say, okay, well, it feels like this. And say, well, how do you know that that's what it feels like to feel like a man? How do you interpret that? At some point, it always comes back to, well, thought. Thought explains that feeling to me. I just have a sense that I'm a man. And at some point, it has to be interpreted by thought for us to understand it in that way, as an identity, as something separate from life itself. And no harm in that. It's just an identity, right? Just as a role to communicate and to live in the civilized world. But come to see how we know things, how we think we know things. And then we can go deeper with those questions then and say, well, are they really true? At the deepest level, is it true that I'm a man? I'm not saying my body's not male. I'm saying, like, is that my primary identity? Or is that what I am? When all the stories fall away, is that what I am? How would I even know? So it seems like a no-brainer, of course, of course. But if I sit here and I ask myself that question, am I a man? And I'm not able to answer it with thought, how can I answer it? Yes. I may not answer it no, but I would say, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the answer to anything is if I can't think about it. And again, we're not making thought an enemy. We're just saying that if we want to know who we are, it's never going to be a thought. We can't understand it at that level. So without thought, at any moment, you're free of identity. And what's that? What is that? What is that stillness? What is that experience of a quiet mind? Without naming it, right? Without trying to understand it, you just ask yourself, what is this? What is this quiet space? What is this sense feeling that I exist, that I've always had, and it feels ageless? What is this? And we don't want any answer. We don't want, I don't know. That might be the sense of it. I don't know because no thoughts are coming. But the key is, right, to keep that quiet mind even after we ask these questions. We want the mind to be quiet, not by force, but we come to see with enough experiences, enough practice that that's where the answers are in the silence. But then the answers can never be understood at the conceptual level because they're always now, right? It's presence. Presence is one word for the answer. And presence can never be understood by the mind. The mind needs time to understand things, and presence is timeless.